Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Let's jump in.
This time we're tackling preventative healthcare, but with a really interesting focus on how it's being approached in China.
Should be fascinating. Where are we starting?
We're diving into this lecture by Arnaud van der Veer.
Van der Veer, okay.
Yeah, he's got a PhD, and he was speaking to Fesco, the big HR and consulting firm.
Right, I've heard of them.
Well, he was giving this lecture in Shanghai, and it's got some really thought-provoking stuff.
Like what? I'm curious.
Well, right off the bat, he throws out this idea that most healthcare systems, they're not really about health at all.
Okay, now that's a bold statement. What does he mean?
He calls it sick care. Basically, he's saying we're so focused on treating illnesses after they hit us that we don't put enough effort into preventing them in the first place.
I see. So it's that whole ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure idea.
Exactly. And he even uses those classic examples we can all relate to, like, staying up late, eating junk food. We know it's not good for us, but...
Yeah. But sometimes you just got to meet that deadline or satisfy that late night craving, right?
Exactly. And that's exactly his point. It's that disconnect between what we know we should do and what we actually end up doing.
So how do we bridge that gap, especially in a place like China, where there's this fascinating mix of ancient health traditions and this incredibly fast-paced modern lifestyle?
Right. It's like they have TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, which is all about preventative practices, acupuncture, herbal remedies, the whole shebang.
Right. Thousands of years of history there.
But at the same time, you have this booming economy, massive urbanization, and a work culture that's known for being, well, pretty intense.
So how do those two worlds collide? How does that impact the way they approach health?
That's what's so interesting. Van der Veer really emphasizes that you can't separate China's approach to health from its cultural and societal context.
Makes sense. It's all connected.
Like, he points out how much pressure there is in Chinese work culture and how traditionally that pressure's been seen as something to overcome, to channel into, competitive power.
And he's saying maybe that's not the healthiest approach.
It seems like he's at least suggesting it might be time for a bit of an update in how they view that pressure.
So we've got this really interesting tension, right? Ancient wisdom about balance and prevention on one hand.
And the demands of a rapidly modernizing world on the other. So where do we even begin to reconcile those two?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Van der Veer lays out this really intriguing three-pronged approach involving knowledge centers, consultancy centers, and then planning centers.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Break that down for me. What's the thinking behind each of those?
It's actually a really holistic way of looking at it. So first, with the knowledge centers, he's talking about empowering people with the information they need to make healthier choices.
Okay, so like education campaigns, workshops, maybe even apps or something.
Exactly. Meeting people where they are in their everyday lives and giving them the tools to really take charge of their well-being.
I like it. Okay, so that's knowledge. What about the consultancy centers?
So that's where it gets really personalized. Imagine having access to experts who can analyze your health data, understand your individual risk factors, and then actually work with you to develop a plan that's tailored just for you.
So it's like having a personal trainer, but for your overall health. I love that.
That's a great way to put it. And here's where it gets even cooler. He sees a big role for TCM in all of this. He suggests that data could actually help bridge the gap between those traditional practices and, meeting modern needs.
Hold on, say more about that. How would that work?
So he doesn't get super specific in this particular lecture, but he does drop this idea that, maybe with data analysis, you could start to identify which TCM practices might be most effective for certain individuals.
I see. So like based on your specific health data, that's fascinating.
Right. It's almost like giving this ancient wisdom a 21st century makeover.
Okay, I am 100% on board. Now, what about the last piece of the puzzle here, the planning centers? What are those all about?
So think of it this way. You've got the knowledge, you've got the personalized advice. Now you need a concrete roadmap to actually put it all into action.
Okay, that makes sense.
That's where those planning centers come in. He pictures them as these hubs where people can go to develop these really tailored health plans. And he's talking about factoring in everything from your diet and exercise habits to your work-life balance. Even your social connections play a part.
Wow, he's really connecting all the dots, looking at the big picture of a person's life.
Absolutely. It's not just about treating illnesses. It's about designing a world where people actually thrive.
I am so on board with that message, but I have a feeling we're just scratching the surface here, right? How does he actually propose we make all of this happen?
Oh yeah, we've only just begun to uncover all the layers of his vision. He actually lays out like a potential timeline for making this whole thing a reality.
Okay, now we're talking. Hit me with it. Where does he suggest we start?
So he proposes kicking things off in 2011
Okay.
by focusing on building the infrastructure for those centers we talked about, the knowledge, consultancy, and planning centers.
Makes sense. Got to lay the groundwork.
Exactly. But then it gets interesting. By 2012, he wants to shift gears
Oh.
and dive headfirst into education, specifically targeting a group he calls the talents.
The talents. Okay, you're going to have to explain that one. Who's he talking about?
He's a little vague on the specifics in the lecture, but based on the context, it seems like he's referring to those in positions of influence,
Yeah.
leaders within businesses and organizations.
Got it. So kind of like if you can get those key players on board.
Exactly. They can become champions for change within their own spheres of influence.
Clever. But what exactly does he propose teaching these talents?
He's really laser focused on this idea of shifting health and safety standards in the workplace.
Okay, I can see how that makes sense.
Like he argues that if you can reduce workplace casualties, suicides, even just instances of people calling in sick, you create this domino effect.
Right. Healthier employees, healthier bottom line, everybody wins.
Exactly. It's a win-win. But how do you actually get there? Well, he throws out these really interesting ideas for pilot programs.
Oh, like what?
Like, get this, introducing psychological self-adjustment units in workplaces.
Psychological self-adjustment units. Okay, that sounds a little intense. What does that even mean?
I know, right? It does sound a little Big Brother-ish at first. He's pretty vague on the specifics, but it seems like he's picturing these dedicated spaces within workplaces where people can go to de-stress.
Okay, so like a meditation room or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Or maybe even get some counseling, practice mindfulness, that kind of thing. It's about addressing mental health before issues escalate, which, let's be honest.
Not really something most workplaces are known for, right?
Exactly. But so important, especially given the pressures he was talking about earlier.
For sure. Okay, so we've got these psychological units. What else is on his pilot program wish list?
He's also a big advocate for more robust family support systems.
Okay, so things like on-site childcare, resources for elder care, that kind of thing.
You got it. And then to really shake things up, he throws out this idea of integrating local insurance into the mix.
Now, that's interesting. How would that work?
It sounds like he's envisioning a system where preventative measures are actually incentivized, potentially even subsidized.
Wow, he really is thinking big picture. I can see how those kinds of systemic changes could be real game changers.
Right. But he also seems to acknowledge that it's not going to be easy. He actually points out some of the potential cultural barriers to adopting this kind of preventative approach to health.
Like what kind of barriers?
Well, like how do you convince people to change deeply ingrained habits, or how do you effectively communicate the link between a healthier lifestyle and, better job performance? Those are big questions.
He makes a good point. It's not always easy to change people's mindsets, especially when it comes to something as personal as their health.
Exactly. It's complex. And
Yep.
that's where he really hammers home the importance of data.
Data, okay.
He's not just talking about collecting it either. He's talking about analyzing it, understanding what works, what doesn't, constantly adapting.
So it's about being strategic, using data to really refine the approach over time.
Exactly. You got it. And it's not just about the big data either. He also stresses the importance of empowering individuals with their own data.
Oh, interesting. What does he have in mind there?
He talks about giving people access to these like personalized dashboards, kind of like those fitness trackers everyone's obsessed with.
Right.
But for your overall well-being, you can track your progress, see how your choices directly impact your health.
That is amazing. It's like having a 247 health coach in your pocket.
Right. And he talks about making other services more accessible too.
Mm-hmm.
Weight control consultations, lifestyle analyses, even activity plans that are tailored to you.
It's about making preventative healthcare, almost enjoyable.
He actually uses that exact phrase, one-stop shopping. I mean, who would have thought you'd hear a healthcare expert say that?
Right. That's amazing.
He wants these vibrant health hubs where people can access a whole range of services under one roof.
It's like he's completely flipping the script on how we view healthcare. It's not just about going to the doctor when you're sick. It's about incorporating these healthy habits into your life. Love it.
Right. It's a total paradigm shift.
Okay, this is all amazing. But he doesn't stop there, does he? What about those prevention research centers he mentioned?
Yes. Those become super important. He sees them as playing this key role in constantly pushing the boundaries of preventative healthcare.
Okay, I'm listening.
He specifically calls out things like, tailoring food plans based on your genetics, developing new devices for early detection and intervention, even like refining sport plans for optimal health.
He is not messing around. This is incredible.
Right.
But it also seems incredibly complex. So how does he propose we actually, like, manage all of this on an individual level? It's almost like he's creating this massive health management system, but how do you even begin to personalize something like that on such a huge scale?
Well, that's where it gets really fascinating. He talks about pulling data from all kinds of places.
Like what? What kind of data?
Your medical records, for starters.
Yeah.
But then also, like, data from wearable tech, maybe even things like your grocery shopping habits.
Okay, now that is a lot of information, but I guess the more data you have, the more personalized you can make those interventions, right?
Precisely. And this is where his background as a consultant really shines through. He's not just like throwing out ideas, he's actually laying out concrete steps. Like, how do you design these kinds of large-scale preventative health programs? How do you implement them? He even talks about training healthcare professionals to operate within this new system.
Oh, that's such a good point. You could have all the fancy tech and all the data in the world, but if the people using it aren't on board.
Exactly, it's not going to work. And he seems really aware of those challenges, especially, in a place like China where you have such a diverse culture and it's changing so rapidly.
Right, like how do you define a healthy lifestyle when you're talking about such a diverse population? And how do you encourage people to make changes when their traditions and beliefs might be very different from, what those programs are promoting?
He grapples with those exact questions. He talks about the importance of understanding those cultural factors. Like, he mentions how important the concept of face is in Chinese culture.
Right, I've heard about that.
And how that might influence how willing people are to seek help for health issues that they see as maybe embarrassing or taboo. He's very aware of that.
So it's about being sensitive to those cultural nuances, not just assuming that one size fits all.
Exactly. And it's not just about changing individual behavior either. He argues that you need changes at every level of society, like healthier food policies, cities that are designed for walking and biking, that kind of thing.
Creating an environment that supports health.
Exactly.
He even talks about promoting mental health awareness in the workplace.
Which we know is so important.
Huge. And he ends on this really powerful note, this idea that health eats wealth.
Right. Such a simple equation, but it really makes you think.
It does. Like when we invest in our health, we're investing in our families, our communities, our whole society. And that's a message that resonates no matter where you live or what you believe.
Absolutely. It's universal.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the big question for all of us is, if health is wealth, what investments are we willing to make? In ourselves, in our communities? What will it take to create a healthier and ultimately a wealthier future for everyone?
It's about thinking long term. What kind of world do we want to leave for the next generation?
Those are questions worth pondering. That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.